Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the sextile between Saturn and Pluto that's going to be perfecting on the 28th of March, 2026. But this one's going to be with us for pretty much the entire last bit of March. So from the time this video is published, pretty much through to the end of March, we're going to be dealing with this kind of energy. So we'll go through some of the technical details here, and then we'll look at this from a collective perspective, a global perspective, and then we'll take that through sign by sign and look at how this is going to be aligning in your own chart as well. So the sextile, as you can see, it is perfecting at 5 degrees and 9 minutes of each of the signs. Saturn is in the sign of its fall in Aries, so it's somewhat uncomfortable here. And then we have Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. We even have a lot of the themes that I'm going to discuss here around authority and power and control and ego and pushing things forward and, individuality and sovereignty and things like this. This is all getting kind of reinforced by the fact that the sun is actually going to come through this area in the week that I'm speaking of. So from the time that I publish this is all getting really highlighted by the sun coming through this area as well. Now, this is not any sort of mushy or sentimental kind of an energy here. Not at all. This is very much about getting things done. This is strongly about boundaries, again, about control and authority. It is fundamentally structural, is very disciplined, very determined. And what it's ultimately speaking of is how are we needing to innovate some of the structures that we have in our own lives? What are our long-term plans going forward? And how can we adjust those so that they're going to be more sustainable going forward? So that's going to be a big theme of this on a personal level. I do hate to say, I think that for the most part on the global level, this will look a bit icky, but there's a lot of silver linings to this in terms of how we can utilize this together, how certain institutions can utilize this energy, and just for all of those things that I mentioned. Structural innovation, change, reform, things along those lines. But it is cold in nature. It's not oriented toward compassion or something like this, right? So I want to make that very clear. Additionally, this is going to be our first aspect between Saturn and Pluto since January of 2020. And that was a major marker that we were pointing out around COVID. Now, this isn't a conjunction, so it shouldn't quite be as rough necessarily. There's a bit more of a flow here. It's a bit more of a gentle energy than that conjunction, but I've already seen some echoes of that. So for instance, with the energy crisis that's being dealt with, we see a lot of countries leaning back on some COVID era policies of like 4-day work weeks, 4-day school weeks, working and schooling from home, so that we can make the power that we have more sustainable, so that we can kind of ration that energy out a bit, which is speaking to these planets in such a fascinating way, but also very interesting that it's speaking to the utilization of some of those COVID era policies in this moment as well. So let's talk about this on a collective level, how all of us can utilize this on our own and together, what the basic energy of it is. On a personal level, I'm kind of looking forward to it. My own personal plans are to try and get as much work done as I can, to try and plan things out and get a lot of check marks, on my list of things to do. So if you've been feeling, especially with the Mercury retrograde, a lot of the retrogrades basically that we've had in recent months, if you've been feeling like you've really been pushing through it, one thing you'll notice is that we don't have any retrograde planets at this point. Plus, we have an excellent amount of traction, almost a very ideal kind of traction that we should be able to get our wheels really pushing in the right direction with this. So if there's stuff that you've been feeling is a major drag, that's been taking too long, that you've been needing to go over again and again, that you haven't quite been clear on how to push forward on certain things, this should help a lot with that. So that I'm pretty psyched about with this. But there's also other layers to this. So notions of authority, it's going to be big in terms of what we're talking about, the discourse, what we're focused on, who has authority and have they earned it? Is that meritorious or is it something that people have lucked into or stepped on other people in order to get the legitimacy of authority, I think is going to be a quiet conversation that we're having, say, in workplaces and things like this, in our own communities and lives. And that is a double-edged sword. If someone is not wielding their authority in a way that is beneficial to groups of people, that can blow back during this period of time. But if someone has earned a place of authority and they are utilizing their position, their status, their leadership qualities for the collective good, that's going to be very respected during this time. So that should actually wind up paying off quite a bit. So it's going to be a matter of how are we utilizing these things. When we're dealing with Saturn and Pluto, there is a major potential for things to go awry if we are kind of screwing around. So if we need lessons about boundaries, if we need lessons about how we're treating other people, these are going to be just so thrilled to be able to provide those lessons. But you can get some really long-lasting, maybe not the most fun, maybe not the most lighthearted, maybe not the most, oh, wow, I really lucked into that kinds of rewards, but more lasting rewards of, wow, I really earned that. I pushed and pushed, and I wound up accomplishing the result that I was aiming for. So I have here this resilient, quiet leadership. We can get a lot done on our own behind the scenes. And I think that that's going to be the number one best way that I would recommend utilizing this. We do have some collective energy in the fact that Pluto is in Aquarius. If we're able to kind of work on our own and then bring that together with people with different skills and different qualities and so forth on a team effort, that's wonderful. But I do feel like there will be a little bit of bristling if people are kind of telling each other what to do or trying to over-direct team efforts. And leadership is going to be kind of a fine line here to follow in a way that people are really going to respect. So the more that we can really stay in our own lane, I think the better with this kind of energy. It does also really provide an opportunity for self-mastery. So when it comes to the psychological dimensions that Pluto brings in as well, asking ourselves questions about our boundaries, how much we respect our own, how much we respect others. Do we feel that we are able to handle what we need to in our own lives, that we are self-sufficient, that we have a healthy ego, that is not like megalomaniacal, but just a healthy ego, a sense of self, without needing for that to impose upon others? I think those are some questions that would be great to ask during this time, but just to check against as well. Those are going to be the guardrails here. Any ambitions that we've had that we've been pushing toward, that may have been some of what we've been pushing against with all of the retrogrades and things like this. We may be recognizing here that there are some outdated ambitions that just don't fit anymore, that just don't seem like they're paying off, that are not that joyful, that the results are not that satisfying when we do achieve them. Pluto is going to give us an ability to release some of that and do so in a way that is gentle and in and of itself lightening of the energy, and so kind of satisfactory on that level as well, because it's making us then more efficient. When it comes to our plans that we're aiming for, that's another thing I would really recommend. If you can't quite get the traction to get going because you're still a little bit unsure as to what you're aiming at here, the planning aspect of this is going to be wonderful as well, and it's going to have an eye towards sustainability. So one actually little caution that I would mention with this around the traction we can get toward our goals is try not to allow for Saturn and Aries, which can at times be all in, let's just pedal to the metal, we're not going to stop until we get it done, kind of an energy. That's not the most sustainable thing, and Pluto can start to question that and can throw some obstacles in the way of that as well. Saturn and Aries can do that in and of itself as well. So again, the sustainability, the sustainably applied energy toward our goals, I think is going to be really excellent too. And when you're planning things out, really check and make sure, are you focusing on creating a compartmentalized time for well-being, for joy, for letting up on yourself a little bit, or are you creating a plan for yourself that is just going to require too much energy and effort and is going to wind up burning you out? This is going to point out where you do feel burnt out. which can be really helpful if we're able to work around that or able to plan around that or let up a little bit. There's a huge amount of discipline and courage here too, again, especially with the way that the sun is kind of playing into all of this. Even Neptune is quietly kind of behind the scenes, increasing the level of idealism or optimism or hope around what it is that we're driving at here. So there's a courageous aspect of, I know that I'm going to have to go off the trodden path to really pursue a personal goal that I believe in deeply, that I want to see through. This is absolutely going to give you the courage, the wherewithal, the gumption, basically, to do something like that. And then to put the discipline in, to put one foot in front of the other, and accomplish something that you may have kind of doubted in recent years when we've had a huge amount of even just passive energy. We have a lot more active energy coming up this year, and getting us started with this alignment that is going to enable us to kind of slowly work through the gears and get the speed going, I think is really excellent too. Now, we may find that we are pretty obsessive. Both Saturn and Pluto, even on their own, can be pretty obsessive, but they are reinforcing that in each other through the sextile. So the obsession will support the goals, the long-term goals, and the long-term goals are going to reinforce the obsession, to go after them. So excellent for focus, especially if you tend to find that that is something you struggle with, to stay on task. But this may at times turn into hyper focus, where you may notice that you haven't gotten up and moved around for like 5 hours because you've been really focused on achieving or like finishing a specific kind of a task. So that is something to check in on. Pluses and minuses there for sure. But this does definitely give you the ability to really channel your energy. So maybe even really worth, especially if you are getting this video in the beginning of the week, trying to plan out your week, you're really likely to check all of those boxes. Finally, again, coming back to this question of authority, Saturn follows the rules a little bit more, but it is very inclined to dole out rules. And in Aries, we should be kind of making our own rules. Now, I don't mean that in a kind of screw everyone else kind of a way. I definitely think that it's wise to stay in our own lane when Saturn is in Aries. So that's going to be for a couple of years here. If we're stepping on the toes of others, there's a lot of potential for blowback with Saturn in Aries. Pluto, on the other hand, is more about power. So it doesn't really rely on authority or legitimacy, I should say, in order to exercise a sense of control over things. So where it is that you feel like you defer to others over your own ideas, your goals, your life, your choices, this would be an excellent time to call that back in, to really question what kind of external control you feel is over your life. Some of that will pass on some levels, at least. The legitimacy test, we have to do our work and we have to live our lives in a way that will physically sustain us, right? We do need to follow the laws and so forth. But where else do we tend to give away our sense of control and authority over defining for ourselves what is significant and important for us in our own lives, what we should be aiming at? Notions of, for instance, status or like keeping up with the Joneses, I could definitely see playing into this. Calling that back in, being willing to define those things on your own terms, I think is going to be really important here too. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about the global situation here. One thing that can suck a little bit about these flowing aspects like sextiles and trines is that when we get them between planets that can complicate things or can present problems in and of themselves by their own kind of archetypes, we can wind up getting them reinforcing each other in ways that we would not love to see. And I think that this is going to show up as abuses of power, authoritarianism. When I was speaking of this on the weekly forecast, it finally came through to me, like these notions of state of exception or state of emergency, like we saw with COVID, where the usual rules didn't apply and there was an ability to instate a special kind of rules that were heavier or stronger or were able to enforce more controls. So I do expect to see some level of that during this period of time. So what I'm getting at is there's not a complication here when it comes to abuses of authority yet. So the only thing that could wind up kind of getting in that way would be the personal exercise of self-authority by those that someone is attempting to control. I'll give you a specific example, though I'm not necessarily predicting this in and of itself, but sometimes we see the authorization of things on a somewhat legitimate basis with Saturn. Sometimes Pluto represents, especially in Aquarius, far-reaching control over people. So we could see what we would naturally think of as an abuse of power that would, for instance, be checked by courts. We could see a court signing off on something like that. So that's what I mean by, in these alignments, there's not something that is stopping that process of overuse or abuse of power. We can get that later, and we can get blowback to that through the process. We can get the people that are actually being controlled taking issue with this and then having consequences to that later. And that's often the kinds of lessons that we see with Saturn and Pluto, is it will allow for you to overstep. It will allow for you to do something bad or wrong, and then it will punish you afterward because you did wind up overstepping. So we can even wind up seeing delays and things like that with Saturn. So I think that this is going to allow for that to occur in this moment. That's why I'm saying I think it's a little bit more icky on the face of it when we look at this on a global level, but there are a lot of silver linings that we can actually work with here too. So I'm going to throw out there all of the rough concepts on the front end. As you can see, this starts to get nicer and nicer. We'll get into the better news in a moment. But again, control, surveillance, authoritarianism, covert operations, and the ethical or unethical nature of that, manipulation of institutions or of people, generally speaking, coercion, exploitation, overreach, kind of strong arm tactics, criminality, overkill, I think is going to be a major issue here too, where it's like, okay, you could have stopped that thing that you wanted to stop with a lot less force than you wound up applying, right? And maybe even something that should not have been stopped, like a protest or something, and really, really, really cracking down in a harsh way that just seems to defy logic. Saturn and Pluto can also speak of violence when they come together, or hatred or anger, things like this. Hate to speak of this stuff, but even cover-ups, trying to hide things, trying to dim things away. There's a real kind of, rather than just overt Mars-Pluto stuff, which tends to come out maybe a bit more on the surface, there is a real Machiavellian nature to Saturn and Pluto at its worst, right? So this is like worst case scenario with that. I do expect some discussion about dark triad, psychological issues, etc. So that's why I don't love this. I am so not a fan of any of these things. They are, all of the worst things in the world, in my view. But I also see that this can be quite helpful. So on the face of it, it does speak to reform as well. When we have a sextile, there is this supportive nature of innovation and change, and let's strip away what's no longer working of Pluto. And let's look at this from a social or a network kind of a level, a really intelligent, intellectual level. Let's get that 30,000-foot view on what our institutions, Saturn, especially martial institutions, war making, military industrial complex could show up here, manufacturing, governments, all of that. So looking at that from an intellectual perspective and saying, how could we maybe change and improve upon this at a structural level? So that is fascinating. I think that we will see a lot of discussion about how do we actively reform these things. And coming from a background in sociology, I love this kind of thing of asking these bigger questions about not just, policy by policy kind of a perspective, but how do you design something structurally in a better way to get better outcomes? What is a part of the system that just kind of continues to be there out of habit? Any movements that are born under this influence or that are active under this influence as well are likely to focus quite a bit on the sustainability of the efforts, on the big picture issues, on what's actually going to work, not just what is going to make us feel good about the fact that we tried. This is really about results. So those should be pretty intelligent and strategic movements or social efforts, policies, etc. I do expect that we will see some collective movements to address social structural issues for the long term, kind of breaking out of old limits, especially on a community level. There's a lot to do with young people as well, with Aries and Aquarius. So we could see this definitely playing out among like youth movements or young, innovative, or kind of reformist leadership making themselves known and making their policy preferences or their styles of reform clear during this time as well, injecting that into the discourse. Even any really big pushes, like these more like revolutionary minded efforts that want to redesign the system kind of from scratch, those are also likely to be more level-headed during this time and more focused, more disciplined as well. So really constructive revolutions, and not just on a social level, but also when it comes to technologies, media, connectivity, etc. with Pluto in Aquarius here. How do we protect sovereignty while still trying to plan around social considerations? How do we protect privacy while still maintaining a social network, basically? So we may even see some things. It would be interesting to me if we see conversations maybe around decentralized social media, things like that. Who owns our data? You know, these kinds of big questions. And also, what is allowed to be done with our data and with automated systems? This is a conversation that I was expecting to kick up around the stellium that we had in Aquarius all around this Pluto, and it's been pretty much ongoing from that point. And this may be a really significant moment in that as Saturn starts to enter that conversation, which is automated weapons, automated targeting. How can we regulate that? And there may actually even be some bills introduced in parliaments or Congress or anything like that to try to address that during this time, because Saturn is going to try to regulate or control that which would go outside of the bounds of what is legitimate or what is allowed or what maintains a sense of order and reason. I think we're also going to see a lot of conversation around surveillance, maybe even big conversations, probably very overdue, about, okay, if we see someone from someone's metadata, if we are tracking them and we see that their phone happens to be in a specific large building of condos, do we have the right to destroy that entire building? Saturn's going to be asking some questions about that, right? So I think that we may have some conversations about these things coming up. There will be a lot of calls around what is ethical, what is right, what is actually good for society even. Not, again, there's nothing really emotional about this. It's very much about what are the results of things. Is this a result that we are wanting to see? And who is able to override the social good to their own ends? You know, and what are the results of that going to be? I think some of the results of that are going to wind up being blowback on a personal level, which is going to be interesting to see too. Now, this is also very consolidating of an energy. So stripping away inefficiencies, being willing to get pretty granular with that and to kind of cut some fat in some places. Now, I'm hoping that there's not an austerity kind of issue here, which there may be, because again, these are not emotional energies, and in the hands that would lean toward austerity, that's where this would wind up going, and this would be supportive of that kind of thing. But I think then it's going to be important to come back to that personal rights and sovereignty aspect of Aries, and then also come back to the social collective good notion that Aquarius winds up bringing into the conversation as well. If you leave a bunch of people behind, what does that actually mean for your society, the well-being, the sustainability of your society? And this may even, in different hands, wind up becoming major questions, for instance, about these issues that have become glaringly obvious about, say, the military industrial complex in the United States and how unbelievably inefficient it is, right? How could we spend so much money on an institution that fails every audit, that can't account for like 60% of its budget, is not calling for, but is being handed like a 50% increase in what's going to be spent, and can't even produce or manufacture interception capabilities at the level that it would need for several weeks, right? So these kinds of really big questions about efficiencies, I expect, are going to be really front and center with this. And that's where I think a lot of the fight is going to be around what does efficiency mean and what are the priorities. So we may even run into some questions of audits and wanting to audit some of these things. Additionally, global and environmental sustainability. Are we creating even a physical environment in which we can thrive as a species, as societies? And finally, with the sextile, these new social institutions, we may actually see the birth not just of social movements, but of actual institutions as well. This does seem like Pluto inaugurating a new social institution, maybe again about military or about individual rights, sovereignty, authority, checks and balances on overreach, on self-serving, things like this. The sun coming through this area may even bring up some shadows. Like we may hear about some self-dealing, and then with the sun coming through here, there may be inquiries and things like that into corruption in, any manner of different governments and things like that. So yeah, that is a lot of the energy of this. I think a lot of this is going to be really, really, really big in the discourse, because it's really an etheric energy that we're all going to be grappling with and frustrated about and wanting to see better solutions around all of this. And there's such an awareness with the sextile of, man, things could be fine. Like things could function in a way that would make sense if we were to prioritize and focus and be more efficient and be more ethical. So I'm fascinated to see how it winds up playing out on that level. But I will say, as far as how authority is used, some of that is going to be icky to look at during this period of time. Now, when it comes to all of these things, I did pull up some of my charts that I happen to have in my archive that this looks like it's going to be relevant for. So I would say kind of foremost, this is really strong in Zelensky's chart. He's got a lot of interesting transits going on right now, so we may see some of this very relevant for him. Also, Nayib Bukele. Jeffrey Epstein's chart is highlighted by this. Hegseth, Lukashenko, Gustavo Petro, Susan Wiles, the Andrew formerly known as Prince, and then additionally, China, Germany, Russia, NATO, and the USA. All of those charts are also strongly activated by this alignment in particular. So likely everything that I just spoke to is going to be quite especially relevant there. As far as where this is going to be angular, where this is going to, like when this goes perfect, where is, for instance, Saturn rising and Pluto on the midheaven, or Saturn on the midheaven and Pluto setting, or something like this, those lines are only going to be intersecting over a landmass around Kodiak, Alaska. But otherwise, they are reinforcing the focus on the waterways right now. So in terms of shipping, this is going to continue to bring up a lot of these questions around authority and who has it, and what you're able to do in international waters and so forth. But I think that is really a lot of what I want to say about the sextile. Like I said, on a personal level, I think we can really work with this. This is something that I feel is really overdue. I had a pretty frustrating, late February into the first couple weeks of March, where it just felt like I couldn't really get my wheels moving too well. I think in part because of the eclipse season, and then we had that eclipse in Virgo that was ruled by Mercury retrograde. So try not to feel bad if it has felt like you haven't been able to get as much done. This should help us to really, like I said, kick it into gear. And then all summer, we're working with energy where we can move forward. So this is kind of the end of that feeling like we're really stuck in the mud kind of feeling that we've had. But yeah, Other than all that, I do want to thank you all so much for spending this time with me. I hope that this video was helpful. Like I said, there are horoscopes for each sign. Feel free to check out those timestamps. Those should apply foremost for your rising sign. Then those planets are going to align with the specific whole sign houses that I'm speaking to in those horoscopes. But do feel free to check out for your sun as well if you would like. And if you don't mind giving the video a like or a hype, I would really greatly appreciate that. And consider sticking around by subscribing. We tend to look at these major alignments. There's quite a few coming up, one after another, that we're going to get into that are quite big. As we move through, we're going to get a big Aries stellium coming up in April. And we also have in April Uranus moving into Gemini, and just a really packed summer. So if you want to get those videos in your feed, hit that subscribe button. And there is information in the description box about personal readings, natal readings, personal transit readings, locational readings, synastry readings. There's a link in the description box below for that, as well as for memberships where I do weekly forecasts. We also do monthly sessions where I dig into a topic and cover it quite thoroughly. We're currently going through all the houses, so if that is something of interest to you, that is available in addition to discounts and free reading drawings and so forth. And with that said, I do want to thank you so much to the members of this channel for your support. So thank you so much to Angel Niblock, JJ, Michelle Howell, Deborah Kealevitt, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Aya, Rachel Windholtz, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, the Nelson Cat Maya, Connie D. Martino, Dolly Geezy, Mango JT, B. Love, Startlingly True, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Maria Cyril Hyro, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Chad W., Jonathan Mason, Adrian K., SP, Ezekiel LaRosa, Teresa Jones, Sherry Leas, Neoke Beam, Farts and Chuckles, Create, Gales Tarot and Astrology, Talita McKenzie, K from NH, Pitar Music, Nancy Imhoff, Peta Carlin, Sarah M. Cap, Angela Lazaire, King Court Comics, Jane Bevan, Helena Fisher, Tina Reynolds, Sacred Alpaca, Natasha P., Indy Loon, Linda Skull, Mehrnoush Amiri, Ellen McCormick Martins, Black Sheep Pink Unicorn, Someone77, Attunement Tarot, Cookerzilla, Joshua Owen, J.A., Carrie Affronti, Mike, Lynn Ching, Kiska Kuznetsova, Linda Osborne, Denise Gull, Many Stars, E.F., Zoe, Plamena Molinova, The Muslim Researcher, Dante Hill, Cameron, Larissa F., Marlo Murphy, Allison Arthurson, Janelle S., Janet McCann, Gamine, CPT Alpha 12, Mina Dobras, NG, Rebecca Cortez, Ricky Dandridge, Novocaine, Brandy Williams, Allison Elliott, Mason HKW, MA, Adya Freya Willow Raven, Psychics and Mediums, Nat Catnip, Shane V, Jesse, Aaron Paterson, Shell Hawkins, Amanda Emmons, This Is It My Friend, Tracy Gordine, Sabrina Simon, JL, Grounded Fire, Shadow and Soul Revolution, Esther Swan, Victoria Gordon, Lizzie Willow, Emily Zoe, Scarlett Sparks, Patricia Cogley, Alex T, Kim Spina, Rachel Y, Ruby Payne, Valerie Hamilton, Gabriel Pages, Sunshine, Amputate, Rebecca Fusetti, Anna Jordan, Roxette De La Cruz, I Hate 1988, Sylvia C. Abel, Jennifer Arena, Veronica Dubiel, Linda McCallan, Jenny Tron, B, Desiree Damsky Hamlin, Maria Paula Major, Katie Scarlett, Sandra Anderson, Corvix Cornix, The Electric Cheese Productions, Marlena Kimber, Giselle Christine, Danny Baneyful, Stacy Starkey, Aw Cameron, Casey Ruzma, Petra S., Kelly Zarsa, Peace Yarn and Paper, Mused Wellness, Padme Moonflower, Holobiont One of Many, Monique Bird, Pample Granite, Deb Wrights, Melissa Campbell, Susanna, Jenna Martindale, Charles Oganike, Siobhan, Big Sky 25, I Am Just Me, RG, Maria Brandusa, Coleman, Follow the Moon and Grab the Stars, Candace Harris, Angela C., Amanda, Rusina Velev, Belen Valadares, Elma Reinhold, Karen Charas, Amy Odom, Jenna Chatton, Sophia M., Still Ripples Coaching, Floto Yudi, Penny C., Coco, Catherine Terra, Lisa Cummings, Nikhil, Dortya Cogman, Melissa Sinclair, Fanau Tutone, Jessie Gret, Sharif Artzik, Linda Yavin, Emra Ogman, Mel, Daryl Fang, That Witch, Danny Psychic Tarot, Kate Vaughn, Bucky, Ive Modoc, Jess Morris, Femke Lemberg, The Krabby Cancer, Bubba444, T with Lilith, G, J, From Scarcity to Sovereignty, Iris Ho, Ronick M. West, Nika Ritter, L. Rude, Mardulia, Rich Casey, Via Matves, Nikita Sharma, Tracy Laumert, and Fasina Adakhanbi. Thank you all so much for your support. Much love to you. And without any further ado, let's get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto taking place from your first house to your 11th. So this is about your personal goals, aspirations, your social role, the role that you play in groups. So this is going to be about reestablishing that on a firmer foundation throughout this period of time. You may find that you are releasing some aspects of that no longer feel like they're working for you anymore, that feel like maybe notions of yourself that almost feel like dead weight, where you're able to kind of slough off some sense of social expectation or trying to be something that just doesn't feel like it fits anymore. It's likely that some of what you're coming back around to during this time is a disciplined sense of self. So maybe this can be less socializing or like for fun. Maybe this can be really getting down to brass tacks and saying, you know what, for about a year or two, I'm really going to push myself to accomplish this thing. I know that if I just keep my nose to the grindstone, I can get it done. So that's what I'm going to be for a while, is just really, really, really focused on my goals and what I'm setting out to achieve. So this can really work up some very strong self-will to become something bigger or better, or just more thoroughly yourself, stepping more into yourself. And so that's also why I have here like quality over quantity in your goals and your social circles. You may feel the need to pull back from some people or some groups or some social obligations or some social expectations or some social inhibitions that you carry, trying to please other people or trying to fit a certain role that is holding you back at this point. So this is also going to be a lot about not just discipline, but efficiency. So if you really want to redouble your efforts, rather than overexhausting yourself and burning yourself out, this could look like pulling back on certain things so that you are able to pour that energy into big long-term goals that you have. This could also wind up putting you in a leadership position or taking on an authoritative kind of a role. You should be able to carry that well, especially if you focus very strongly on notions of integrity and trying to uphold that and trying to take that on as a major characteristic that is like really important to who you feel like you are. This can also speak to being connected to some people who are really able to give you a powerful leg up. So receiving support from people who are in positions of influence as well. And yeah, just making really excellent effort toward your goals. Now, this does look a bit more personal, aspirational to me than just necessarily work-related or relationship-related. This looks to me more about who you are, what your identity is, what your station is, basically. So it does look quite big to me in terms of what it is that you are working on restructuring through this time. But you should have the support that you need, especially if you are able to prune some influences that may have felt like they've been distracting of your goals. Being able to show up in a way that makes a really great impression on people in positions of influence, being able to carry authority quite well as a sense of personal responsibility and integrity, and making that a big part of your personality. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aries. It looks quite powerful. It looks like you can get a lot done throughout this broader period of time. We have the sextile coming up at the end of March, but these planets are going to be in these signs, both of them until Saturn leaves Aries in a couple of years. So there's a lot that you can run with this. And especially if you can really clarify your goals around this moment and then just follow through on them in the coming couple of years, it may even feel weirdly easy. It's like I have my plan laid out in front of me. So all I need to do is just go through all of the steps and make sure that I don't get distracted from that. But yeah, so I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Taurus, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto reaching from your 12th house with Saturn to your 10th house with Pluto. So this is fundamentally about working behind the scenes, about facing any internal fears, about being seen, or about accomplishments, about your personal goals, about your future, pushing through those. So this is going to help a lot with sorting out any long-term plans toward a greater sense of control over your own life, over your working life, over the effort that you put into things. And I do expect that you're going to be doing a lot of this behind the scenes, sorting out what you really want for yourself, defining personal success for yourself, figuring that out in a way that's truly meaningful to you. Now, this could certainly have you pivoting toward meaningful work, like spiritual work, or becoming more and more known for a sense of quiet wisdom that you are bringing to situations, your ability to self-master, but also to help others through these sort of difficulties that they are dealing with, especially if you are able to face down some personal fears, anxiety, self-doubt, self-sabotaging patterns and things like that that should be more apparent to you during this time. This should help a lot with your sense of personal influence, your ability to make an excellent impression on those in positions of power, and to be able to wield power in a way that's very, very, very effective. You may even have specific moves that you are figuring out behind the scenes that you're going to be implementing as well. But all of this is really coming down to not needing to look outside of yourself for the plan, your future plan, or what you define as success for yourself, or what you are looking for in your life, but rather figuring that out based on your own personal internal needs, and then plotting that out and following that path, regardless of whether you have other people on side or not, regardless of whether you even feel like there are people around that you want to share these plans with. This is you figuring that out and doing it anyway. It's actually fascinatingly straightforward to just kind of reiterate here, defining success on your own terms, no longer looking for a sense of power or authority or guidance outside of yourself, rather defining that for yourself, laying that out step by step as to how you're going to push yourself in the direction that feels really meaningful to you, and then following that path, probably without sharing it with a bunch of people, but making a huge amount of progress. And a lot of this is going to center around releasing any sort of fears, anxiety, self-sabotaging behaviors, self-doubt, things like that. But yeah, I don't know really what else to say about that. It looks pretty fascinating to me and interestingly straightforward. So I do hope that you're able to make a lot of progress with this alignment. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto stretching from your 11th house to your 9th house. So for you, this is going to be very much about what are you aspiring to? What do you really believe in, especially with regard to your place in the world and your ability to have an impact on the world or on society, your social views, your knowledge, your wisdom, and what you intend to do with that. So this could put you in something of a leadership position when it comes to your beliefs about things, when it comes to your perspective, sharing that quite widely. So you may be in a role where you're actually structuring that out, organizing people or around a worldview, around an idea. So this could be on a community level, it could be on a global level, certainly with that Pluto in the 9th house. In the coming many years, you may be really connected to international groups as well. So this could be like a local community, but it could also be a community of like-minded people. And again, this is likely to be centered around something that you are collectively believing in or collectively contributing to. So you could find yourself leading a group like that, or organizing, even initiating a group like that, if there's something that you're wanting to organize around, but you just don't see that there's any groups that are doing that to get involved with. Now, you may also have, in a very productive way, your perspective on things, your worldview restructured in this period of time, where it forces you to take more viewpoints into consideration, or it forces you to take a different perspective, to look at the different facets of, global situations or philosophical considerations than you have before. So it's forcing a sense of growth, and it may feel like there's a bit of a challenge there to what you used to believe, but it's about growth. It's about getting a clearer understanding of your place in the world, what the world is capable of, what society is capable of, and what you can contribute to that. Now, this may also wind up centering around some of these social kinds of academic topics as well. So you may be studying society in some way. You may be publishing to an audience, publishing your knowledge, disseminating your understanding of really any given topic. You may find yourself in a teaching position as well. Legal or travel considerations or culture could wind up being pretty central to your aspirations here as well. So for instance, pursuing a legal degree, or desiring to be a digital nomad and travel around quite a bit, reaching for a teaching position, starting to publish and then gaining an audience through that, wanting to understand things better and wanting to then kind of infuse that into who you are, is that you understand and care about whatever this topic is. So you may find your kind of fascination getting stirred up in a way that you actually actively want to pursue. But a lot of this is really going to speak to your personal life philosophy. What do you think that you are capable of doing in society? What impact, what influence do you feel that you are able to have? Now, that may feel a little bit burdensome here and there over the coming couple of years that you have Saturn in your 11th house. You'll also have Pluto in your 9th house for that whole time. Pluto's going to be there for a long time. But the sextile is allowing us to have a moment of goal setting around what it is that we're wanting to do. So if you want to find yourself in a leadership position when it comes to, or an influential position when it comes to groups of people, this is where you can really hit the ground running, get that started, and then run with that over the coming couple of years. I will tell you, though, you're probably going to find at the end of a couple of years from now that you are able to have a much stronger impact than you might imagine. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini. So I do hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have the Saturn-Pluto sextile going from your 10th house with Saturn to your 8th house with Pluto there. So for you, this is fundamentally about notions of power, control, authority, and where you are rooting that. So there's probably going to be a lot of even compulsion, or just a drive or an urge to feel more in control of your own destiny. So that may be financial, it may be in terms of your career, but anyone that you feel has some kind of attachments within your life and has some sway over your path ahead, you may find that feels somewhat intolerable or very noticeable during this time, and something that you want to address. Now, this isn't going to be one of those knee-jerk things, if you're at all using it, I would say, correctly, but it is going to be about plotting out a long-term plan for yourself about how to gain greater control over your own future here. Pluto is bringing up these notions of how much control do you give over to other people, and how much do you share of yourself? How much energy do you pour into the considerations of other people, the feelings of other people, their circumstances, and trying to address things for other people? And how much do you import then the expectations and standards and beliefs and so forth, the worldview of other people, into your own personal notions of success for yourself. Now, we do want to have lives in which we can share with other people, but we also do want to really be kind of on top of that in terms of how that's going to affect us. So I could definitely see a lot of long-term planning going on around your finances, your resources. This could be figuring out a long-term tax plan. This could be trying to figure out, for instance, maybe if you have a return coming in, how you're going to wind up applying that so that you are able to get yourself in a position where you feel like you have more flexibility in your life. If there's someone that feels like they're a bit dominating over your life, also trying to figure out how to create a greater sense of independence from that. If there are people who are dependent upon you, how then are you able to assert greater control over your life so that you're also able to guide them better? So creating a sense of lasting security for yourself and through others, especially trusted others, through your own long-term planning and effort. So this does speak of taking on new responsibilities, taking on an authority role where you may feel that this requires some level of grit, but it also does have some traction and some leverage. There's something you can definitely work with and push through here and keep yourself motivated through. Like, you should be able to see some pretty strong results from this just as you basically put the rubber to the road. So create those long-term plans, but then try to make it step by step so that you're able to follow through on a lot of that and see some of the results of this even in the short term. So that grit, yeah, that is something it requires from you, but it's also something that this enables in terms of getting traction through the grit of the situation, right? Finally, I have this note here about facing fears regarding success can help you to reach your goals. This is really about defining success for yourself. Now, you may worry, if I am successful or I put myself in a position of authority, are there going to be all these demands placed on me, etc.? You can help to shape and guide any sort of a role that you're trying to put yourself in or that you're stepping into around this time, or even that you find yourself already in, where you really feel the need to create some greater boundaries about what's expected of you and the amount of dependence upon you. You are allowed to define that for yourself. And the more that you are able to define what you're sharing with others and so forth for yourself, the more comfortable you'll likely be in those kinds of roles. But also, if you're able to step outside of other people's notions of what success looks like, these linear paths that other people like to force us to try to follow, even though it feels like none of us do these days anyway, but rather allow for success for you to feel the way that it does and to look the way that it would for you. Maybe this isn't something that can be entirely quantified, and yet the people around you seem to, speak in numbers and purchases and things like that quite a bit. That's just a total mismatch of notions of success. But if you are aiming for someone else's goals, then it's very difficult to get yourself to a position where you really feel successful anyway. So what kind of fears do you have around success? Are you following the paths of other people? That's going to keep those fears there, I would be afraid. Also, are there fears around success due to the increased expectations and burdens placed upon you through that? Or do you fear that you won't meet the expectations of other people? Really looking at this as much as you can and clarifying this for yourself should help you to, again, be able to utilize the traction that you have here to be able to create a greater sense of personal authority and personal control and power over your own life and finances and so forth. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what I have for you with the sextile. So I do hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto reaching from your 9th house to your 7th. So this is going to speak to the breadth of experience that you have with people. There's a sense of personal growth that you're able to achieve through your connections to other people. Now, off the top, because I don't think that I have it in here, I do have legal considerations. These are the two houses that are most affiliated with legal considerations and things like this. So there may be, if you have an ongoing suit, if you are awaiting a settlement or something along these lines, this can certainly speak to understanding better that situation, maybe around this time frame, and then it continuing to play out for a couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised if that takes longer than you would like with Saturn, in the mix with that. But it's not a bad kind of alignment for legal considerations, but it does indicate that there's a pretty formidable opponent maybe on the other side if it's an active lawsuit. That aside, what we're also dealing with in the ninth house is like your worldview, your connection to people who are afar, your connection to places that are afar, your sense of your ability to grow and to experience life and grow through that experience. And then the seventh house typically has to do with other parties. So people that you have one-on-one connections and relationships with. With Pluto going through that seventh house, you may find that your connections to other people are just a bit more intense. And with the ninth house aspect of this, there's this learning that you're doing through this. So you may be finding that you have a greater influence over people than you think that you do. And you may be then working through the knowledge and understanding that goes into carrying that influence responsibly. So you could even be studying relationships, interpersonal communication, etc. Additionally, I think that this can also speak to like coalescing a theory or a philosophy of relationship. So if you've been kind of going through different connections with people without necessarily a solid basis of this is what I believe about how relationships should go, and this is what I'm going to follow in my connections with people. This is what I expect, and this is what I'm willing to offer, and this is my reasoning for all of that. This could be you kind of formulating a theory of your own preference about relationships. So around notions of loyalty, what do you believe about relationships? What do you believe about your role within them? Especially if there are power dynamics involved here, this looks to me like it is favorable to you. Now, sometimes that shows up as someone trying to assert power and control over you, you seeing it clearly, and then that relationship blowing up, and then now you know, right? So it might not always be the most comfortable thing, but it will teach you for sure about who you are and not playing small in connections with other people. You may even find that there are certain partnerships that you need to travel for. So certainly this could be a long distance partnership, either romantic or friendship or business, but something that works quite well for the long term. Additionally, you may find yourself in a mentor or mentee like kind of role or position or connection with someone where you're learning literally a lot from someone. This could be someone who is of influence, who is older, who has more experience, who has really strongly held beliefs that are well-founded, and picking up a lot of knowledge and wisdom and inspiration from that teacher. Or you, again, playing that role for others. So if you are stepping into like a teaching role here, let's say that you are Saturn up here, which you definitely are, experiencing a kind of Saturnian archetype of yourself in this place of learning and teaching. This could be you teaching your wisdom to others and having a really strong influence and impact on other people through this alignment as well. So you may be very passionate about sharing your understanding with other people. Now, whether that's in a formal class setting or not, people are likely to be seeking out what you know about things. So I wouldn't be shy to share your viewpoint, and I wouldn't play small in any of these connections, these ways that we can tell ourselves, oh, it doesn't really matter what I believe. It does matter what you believe when you have these kinds of transits going on. So yeah, I would be representing that. I would be, waving your flag. I would be seeking out growth opportunities. I wouldn't be shutting down connections or relationships that at least that you can grow through. It might be less important how you label those connections than the wisdom that you're able to derive from them. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Leo. So I do hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto going from your 8th house to your 6th house. So for you, this is fundamentally going to be about notions of the effort and service that you put into things. Is that balanced? Is that healthy? Is that working for you? Is it sustainable? How much are you following through on things because you think that other people expect that from you, or maybe they are completely clear with you that they do, but then is that fair? So digging into all of that and clarifying that for yourself would be the way that I would go about actively utilizing this transit. It should help you a lot to be able to clarify that to yourself. So when it comes to matters of your own personal resources and those which you share with other people, addressing that is going to be helped a lot by this. That could be literal debt. It could be literal investments like I have here, but it can also be very energetic. The 6th house has to do with our sense of service to other people, the effort and energy that we put into things, often, again, in service of other people or in service of like team goals and things like that. And then the 8th house being what we share with other people, but also what they share with us. Some of what they share with us, other people, is these notions of expectations that we need to live up to, supposedly, but that's not always the healthiest thing to be pursuing, because that might not be what you expect or what you want out of life. So being willing to ask these questions of how much of your effort and energy do you pour into your own goals and your own notions of where you want to be financially, where you want to be in terms of your working life, your career, your routines, your energy levels, your health, etc., versus what do you at the very least feel is being imposed upon you from the outside. Try to direct that a little bit more on what you are wanting for yourself with this alignment. This is going to be big time about creating a sense of healthy boundaries for you. Health is going to come up with this quite a bit, in fact. Not just physical health, but yes, also like, again, if you are too tired because you are putting so much of your energy out there, if you are emotionally exhausted because you're doing too much emotional labor, etc., this has a huge impact on the sustainability just of your life and your lifestyle, your routines. So try to figure those out. Try to lay this all out. I think this is going to respond very well to like putting pen on paper and actually look at what your considerations are. What are you putting your energy, your money, your health, your well-being into? And how might you be able to do that in a way that's more efficient and pays off and feels healthier for you? So restructuring your routines in a more efficient way. If you have been dealing with burnout, if you have been dealing with bottlenecks, if you have been dealing with feeling overburdened by the concerns and considerations of other people that are undue, or with boundary violations, things like this, being really disciplined in how you're approaching that and dealing with it head on rather than kind of being on your back foot or just trying to avoid conflict, things like this. This is going to enable you to be pretty stern about things in a way that does not remotely require stirring up any sort of drama or conflict or anything. This is very calculating and very straightforward if we're utilizing it well. So when it comes to any sort of bottlenecks, any sort of boundaries, things like this, this should enable you to just one foot in front of the other, push right through any sort of obstacles in your path here. But again, coming back to this streamlining any sort of labor processes that you have or workload, workflow kinds of processes, try to push toward efficiency with these two, because I think that's where you would wind up having the best results. And finally, like I said, there's these health aspects here, especially any sort of codependency stuff. We've all got it. If you've got Virgo in your chart, I've got a bunch of Pisces in my chart. We're pretty similar. We can have codependent, like people-pleasing kinds of qualities to a fault, for sure. We do wind up seeing that in the 8th house. Those kinds of considerations tend to come up there. Issues of boundaries, issues of going too far to give to others, but also the psychological and emotional issues and considerations of those around us tend to show up here, as well as any sort of energetic, karmic, financial imbalances with other people and emotional imbalances or where we're coming together with other people. And then the 6th house pretty much straightforwardly has to do with some health considerations. So by really scrutinizing all of this and trying to prune, trying to remove the dead weight, trying to remove some of the obstacles that you've just been working around, trying to remove some of the inefficiencies here and clarify for yourself what's really worth keeping and what seems to be holding you back. I think that's going to be just the best way to handle this alignment here. And then hopefully on the other side of it, what I would hope to see with this is that you feel lighter, that you feel like your routine is clearer, that you feel like you're able to focus as much as you need to on any sort of health or well-being patterns or routines that you're trying to create and maintain for yourself, and that you have a clear sense of what you expect from yourself day after day. And then from there, any additional considerations can be added on. But having that baseline clear, I think, is going to be the best result from this alignment here. So yeah, I hope that that makes sense. I know it's not the most fun, but I do think that it's actually very helpful to have this across your 6th and 8th house. So yeah, I hope that this treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto reaching from your 7th house to your 5th house. So this is really going to be speaking to whether or not you are enjoying the connections that you have with people and notions of loyalty and dependability in those connections. Now, these can for sure be romantic connections with people, but these can also be creative collaborations, business collaborations. Even your relationship with your own children can wind up playing into this. So this is going to have you taking those connections very seriously. And again, whether you enjoy them, whether they are healthy, whether the influence is good in those connections. So this could be a period of time, especially when these are themselves in conversation with each other through the sextile, of trying to plan out or trying to get on the same page with someone else as well about what are we aiming at, what are we creating here in our collaboration, whether that be, again, a romantic or business partnership or friendship or anything. So you could find that there is a lot of pretty impassioned conversations that you're having. You could also find that you are connecting with new people because you're going all in on a hobby or an interest, a new project that you're pursuing, and you may be establishing some relationships through pursuing that interest. And I apologize if you can hear any of the noise. There is some kind of construction going on the building that I live in, so it's getting a little loud here and there. But additionally with this can have you taking something that you are able to be very influential with. So a creative hobby, or this could be the impact that you're trying to have on your children, the integrity that you are trying to teach to them, and reinforcing that in a very serious way with Saturn in the 7th house as well. You could also wind up pursuing a creative collaboration with someone else that is very well founded with this kind of an alignment. This could speak to a lot of loyalty, a really serious commitment, and something that works long term. And other than that, I would just say this is going to have you with a greater sense of influence and authority and kind of seriousness, not needing to play small within your connections and relationships, especially those that are close or like relationships with loved ones. There's probably something here about needing to delegate or needing to sort out different people's boundaries, different people's expectations, get on the same page, but not in the kind of way that is going to reinforce any sort of people-pleasing qualities on the part of anyone, really, but just being really honest, being really authentic about what you're expecting from your connections with people. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra, with this transit. So I do hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto going from your 6th house to your 4th. So these are areas of our own everyday life in different ways. The 4th house has to do with home and family, so a lot of the things that we do around the home show up here. The 6th house has to do with routines, tasks, chores, things like this, but also health considerations. So I can see that you are taking that quite seriously, that you're taking your home life, your family life quite seriously. You may be like doing a big spring clean, a big purge. You may be like completely clearing out a garage or something like this. You may be needing to go through a property of someone else, like a family member, and work on that as well. You may find yourself working from home a whole lot during this time as well, or like being told to work from home. You could also be taking your work home. I would maybe try and maintain some boundaries there as well. That's another thing that this alignment will bring up, is compartmentalization and boundaries with your work, but also with your family. So trying to create some space there, trying to create some clarity around your duties, your responsibilities, what is on you to do, and what should other people maybe be taking care of. So I do see, though, that when it comes to those things that you need to do around the home, that you're very disciplined, you're very focused on getting those things done. So this would be a wonderful time if you've been wondering, should I kind of start this long-ish term project of maybe it's redecorating, like I said, maybe it's purging, or maybe it's a DIY kind of a project. Not only do we have the sextile going on now, but it's going to be a while before these planets leave these houses. So you've got time to be able to work with the traction that you're getting around this time and the clarity you're getting around this time about those long-term projects and plans that you have around your home. Now, this could also speak to like family therapy or addressing some family patterns or some structures. What is on you to do? What is truly your responsibility within your domestic sphere? If that has been unfair for some time, this could help you to establish some boundaries there, to point out that you are doing more than your share, maybe within a family structure, to delegate and to take care of your own well-being in this situation, because that Saturn there is going to be speaking to, is this family dynamic, is this home dynamic healthy for me? So on a physical level, certainly that's going to be important. Hopefully this isn't like discovering some issue that you're needing to deal with when it comes to your home. So for instance, like mold or something like that is coming to mind where you're needing to get on top of it, but better to find something like that than to not find it, right? But also on an emotional level. So who's doing the emotional labor within your home environment? Is someone kind of dumping a lot of negativity? Is there a difficult situation within your family that you are hyper-focused on that drags your energy down? I would say you may feel a little bit of guilt about weighing these things up, about creating boundaries, about asking for help. I would try to allow for this to build you up such that you're able to speak of what you need, that you are able to request an equal situation within your home environment, because that's then going to help you a lot with your emotional health, your psychological health, and of course then with your physical health as well. One thing I'll also throw out there with the sextile, you may want to pay closer attention than usual to your sleep patterns and try and make sure that that's pretty solid and good, because that should help you a lot as well. But yeah, if you are able to work through these things, so coming back over them, do you have your work and your home life and the tasks and responsibilities therein properly compartmentalized such that you are not wearing too many different hats at once or needing to spin on a dime to address this or that situation that someone is bringing to you? Are you clear on what's genuinely your responsibility and what's not? Are you able to address the emotional or psychological dynamics within your family? Are you able to establish boundaries so that you are not overdoing emotional labor for other people and draining your own resources that way? If you are able to just even answer those kinds of questions and try to assure those things, that can help you a lot in creating a very sustainable emotional foundation to work from that can be like a rock for you to be able to rely upon, be able to get done what you need to get done without feeling burnt out or drained. So you could really like get at the root of this during this period of time, and I would definitely recommend trying to do so if any of those things have been a bit of a struggle recently. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So I do hope that this alignment treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Sagittarius, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto reaching from your fifth to your third house. Little disclosure, there is some kind of construction going on the building that I live in. So it gets loud at moments here and there. It shouldn't overpower me speaking, but it may creep through a little bit here and there. And I apologize if it does. But with that said, we have this alignment reaching from your fifth to your third. So this is really going to speak to the seriousness with which you take your personal and creative expression. So how is it that you feel that you are able to connect with others? Do you feel inhibited about what you really love, what you really believe, what you really want to do? All of this, taking that really seriously and possibly needing to claim some self-authority over these areas. So if you have felt shackled in any way, if you have worried about what other people are going to think about this or that, this is really calling in that power for yourself. Now, I will say with that said, right, that your expression, your personal verbal and self-expression, creative, written, spoken, your influence on the environment, on the energy even, you are likely to find that it has a stronger impact, perhaps especially around this period of time, but this is going to be playing out for a while. So Saturn is going to be in Aries in this fifth house of yours for, till 2028. Pluto's going to be here for, longer than is even reasonable to consider, for like 20 years. So you're going to have this energy still kind of playing out even on the other side of the sextile. So you may get some insight onto the impact of how you approach people, or the impact of your spirit or your inspiration on other people. And it would be really wonderful if you can kind of check in on that and consider that, think that through. How do I really want to express myself with a sense of integrity and gentleness toward others without getting into people-pleasing kinds of tendencies or things like that as well? So not holding yourself back, but still remembering, hey, my words have a lot of influence and a lot of impact. And so let me try to maybe avoid stepping on some toes or having an impact that I'm not intending to have on certain people, just out of an assumption that people don't really pay attention to what you're saying anyway, that kind of thing. So this may be something that you haven't thought about really much. But what's interesting about this moment is not only the insight, but also the fact that that expression is going to carry more weight, more potential, more influence than usual during this time too. So also when it comes to expression, especially creativity, the projects, the interests, the hobbies that you love to do, the connections in your environment, in your community that you really enjoy just for the sake of them, this is going to have you quite disciplined about that, maybe prioritizing that again. If you feel like you've gotten into work mode and you haven't been doing the more fun aspects of life, this could be one of those moments where you're, again, calling that power in again and saying, no, I really need to define for myself that there's a big aspect of my life that is important to just enjoy. Maybe there's even a skill that you're trying to hone through this period of time. I wouldn't be surprised if writing or some kind of literal emotional expression is a part of this as well, or intellectual expression, reading, learning, things like that. Again, I apologize if that noise is coming through. So this is also a very, very, very productive energy. If you have been trying to sort out, how do I get my life to look on a personal level more the way that I would like for it to look, this is a wonderful time to plan around that. Because again, you're probably going to get a lot of really grounded insights about what, like leisure time and things like this, self-improvement, your hobbies, your interests, etc. So your personal life stuff. How am I going to structure that out? How am I going to not just say that this is a priority, but keep it a priority? How am I going to compartmentalize that from maybe your working life or stresses, responsibilities, or burdens so that you're able to really follow through and not lose sight of that? What is it that's important for you to improve upon when it comes to who you are, being really authentic, etc.? What is it about yourself that you would like to work on? If confidence is any part of that, this is going to help with that quite a bit as well. And any sort of like, I wish I could kind of believe and carry myself with a little bit more authority. I know Sag is, I have a lot of Pisces stuff, and Sag is kind of similar in that, you know, we don't necessarily take ourselves the most seriously, but sometimes that can be a bit of an impediment, you know. Other people may take you more seriously than you take life, right? So there may be a kind of lesson in that with this as well. Now, finally, when it comes to your connections with people, your environment, and your loved ones, to me, the type of people that show up in the fifth house are the people who are either connected to things that we love or just loved ones of any kind of label. So this can also have you taking that really seriously. Boundaries may be important here. There may even be a sense of obligations that are coming in these kinds of relationships that you may need to check. You may need to see, is this really a reasonable thing to expect from me, from my loved ones? Or do I maybe need to say, hey, maybe I need some help with some stuff as well? But reprioritizing, getting those connections really clear and what you're wanting from those connections, as well as what you're wanting from your environment, especially if you feel like the vibe has been off. This does give you the ability to really address that as well. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius. So I do hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto stretching from your fourth house to your second house. So for you, this is fundamentally about property, assets, but also emotional security and stability. So this is really helpful if you need to manage any literal property that can be movable or immovable when we're dealing with the second and fourth houses. Mortgages are going to come up here pretty strong. Like homes and assets along those lines are going to be really, really, really highlighted. This could have to do with rents and things like that as well. So where you're living kind of property shows up in the fourth house, and then your personal resources and finances and things like that tend to show up in the second house. So there may be a consideration here around restructuring your finances for your family as well, so your family budget. This could be moving money around for a family member to support a family member or vice versa, feeling more in control of your own life because of the support and help of a family member as well. And a lot of this is with a long-term like vision in mind. So this could be deep saving, like setting your sights on a long-term goal that you're going after and saving up for that. If you're not buying or selling or moving property or finances around, this is going to be that kind of long-term plan for self-reliant self-sufficiency. But beyond all of the financial considerations, this is also speaking to your sense of inner emotional security. There may be some psychological insights, basically, that you're able to get from how was I conditioned? What was my family life like when I was young, or how is it today still? And how has that impacted my sense of my own value, of my own financial security, literally financial security, or my sense that everything's going to be okay, kind of regardless. So what was reinforced by your early childhood life along those lines? Were you made to feel secure? Maybe this is even being able to reflect on that and root that even more deeply. If you were, for whatever reason, feeling insecure in your early life, if you grew up without money, if you grew up with some authority in your family that undermined your personal sense of security or your value. So what you bring to the table, do you accept less in return for your energy, your effort, your work than you should? This could give you some insights onto where that's coming from with regard to your childhood, so that maybe you're able to uproot that better and then restructure this internal security on a more sure footing for you going forward. So what is your relationship with yourself, with your sense of self-worth, with your sense of internal security, and probably also where is that rooted in your past, with Saturn playing into this, being in your fourth house? Home and family and your past has a lot to do with the fourth. So by digging into that, by trying to address that for the long haul, to address that for good, and to rebuild that structure really sure, this can also represent a really important moment in your emotional healing, your emotional resilience, your recognition of your own resilience, your recognition of the fact that you are likely showing up as a rock during this period of time. I mean, you may even be showing up for family in a way that, ironically, like in the past, they kind of undermined as something that you were able to provide, right? And finally, when it comes to your own sense of internal authority for yourself, the fact that you decide what is of value to you, what do you want to create? What do you want to pour your effort, your energy, your skills, your care into? What do you want to grow in your own life? What kind of lifestyle do you want to have? What kind of home life, family life do you want to have? You are allowed to call the shots on that. And this is going to be encouraging that kind of thing of owning that authority and that self-sovereignty over making those value judgments for yourself and then working toward those things without apology. Of course, family may play into this, but hopefully just healthy family dynamics are allowed to come forward with this. There may be a need to establish some boundaries around the value judgments of family members encroaching upon your own life. If that is something that's necessary, this will certainly help with that. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn. So I do hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have the sextile between Saturn and Pluto reaching from your third to your first house. Off the bat, I need to say there's some construction being done on the building that I live in. So if there's any noise, I apologize for that. It shouldn't wind up overpowering my voice. I'm right up on the mic here and it is, I think, maybe on a different floor. But if that creeps through, I do apologize. I would put this off till later, but it's been ongoing for a couple days, so I don't think it's really going to stop anytime soon. Anyway, coming back to what's going on for you, I think that this is going to be pretty interesting for Aquarius, actually, because you guys have been dealing with Pluto going through the first house if you have Aquarius rising for a little while here. It's been off and on since 2023, and this is a very powerful energy to have in your first house. And I really feel like it's taking some time for Aquarius rising to learn the ropes of having that Pluto transiting through the first house. So for one thing, that in and of itself is going to have the influence and impact that you have on other people be greater, but also it's going to put you in positions to where you're dealing with people like that. And you may also feel like you are experiencing certain things that are testing your willpower or testing your ability to respond, such that you need to recognize, hey, I'm capable of responding to this kind of a situation. So what's interesting about this sextile then is that it's connecting into your third house, which is a place of your mind and expression, your community, people, places, things around you, your environment, etc. So having Saturn there in a supportive position to that Pluto, I think should offer you some insights on how to work with the new energy that you've been dealing with. It may be worth plotting out how has the energy changed since 2023. I wouldn't be shy to take in all of the social global crap, and maybe opportunities and initiatives and things like that into that consideration, because you may find that some of these weird shifts in the power dynamics and stuff like that is impacting you more because you guys have that Pluto in that first house. But if you're able to look at that and try and maybe plot it out on paper, figure out how things have shifted, and then create some sense of discipline and strategy around how, what am I learning about my own influence and power? What am I learning about my own personal goals and how I play small at times and how I shrink from things or flinch from certain situations or try to retreat at times? What has worked when you have felt overwhelmed in terms of your strategy or the way that you have approached those things? Try and clear that up on a conscious level so that you're a little bit more clear about How am I going to make this work for me going forward on a day-to-day basis? That's another thing with the third house, is it's like daily life, right? So how do you take a Pluto in your first house and connect it in a way that's actually supportive of you day to day? This is really excellently aligned for you to get some insight on that. So I would focus kind of primarily on that. This is going to help you in the coming years. You're going to still have Saturn in this third house of yours. It's going to push on from that sextile, but it's still going to be here. Pluto's still going to be in your first house for ages and ages. And if you can get the plan clear here, the strategy clear here, then it's just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other and following that plan that you're setting out for yourself. So in this moment, if you're able to clarify how you would like to reinvent yourself, how you would like to own that Pluto transit, which is an opportunity for you, but sometimes the first house transit can feel like something that's happening to you. A lot of the lesson with Pluto transits is about stop feeling like it's something that's happening to you and start taking the reins of it, you know? So when it comes to influence, power, control, self-mastery, things like that, your assessment of who you are, your ability to transition and change and respond to situations as necessary, your ability to, you know, take a knock here and there, but step up even stronger, the influence that you can have on people around you, especially in your community with the sextile here, getting a lot of clarity on that. That should give you something to look back on in those moments where Pluto feels a little bit heavier and you're having a little bit more trouble whipping yourself into shape to say like, no, I'm taking the reins of this, right? So this is also very likely to have you put into leadership positions or looked to as someone who is wise or someone who has some understanding or information or knowledge that is helpful to your community. This could put you in a teaching role or some kind of mentorship, leading within your community, within your neighborhood, those around you. And this doesn't just have to be local community. It can also be online communities and things like that as well. Additionally, if there's any skills that you're wanting to learn, classes, courses you're wanting to take that you want to tap into because you're trying to reinvent yourself and you feel like, okay, there's this thing that's really important to me, but I actually haven't spent a lot of time digging into that. Maybe it's writing. That could absolutely be. Whenever the third house is involved, we could always speak of writing. If it's a leadership position, maybe you want to study leadership skills or community organization skills or things like this, interpersonal communication skills. Learning those skills should wind up reinforcing your sense of control over who you are becoming. It should also help you to understand the influence that you have over your community, which is not just a matter of kind of building yourself up and understanding to not play small, but also then understanding your impact so that you are able to make sure you're having the impact you want to have. Because these two can be a little bit intimidating at times, and you may find that people are a little bit more intimidated by you and maybe then even kind of reactive toward you at times here and there. So how do you smooth that kind of a situation over? Again, maybe studying interpersonal communication could help quite a bit with that while you are still trying to study speaking with your own truth authoritatively. How do you represent yourself in a way that genuinely represents you, that feels really satisfying, that feels really authentic? How do you not have your voice shake, you know, when you are trying to assert yourself? There may even be something here about stepping into like political leadership roles. That's something I can only encourage of pretty much everyone. I think we need a lot more people who aren't necessarily trained to be politicians to run for local office and stuff like that. I could only encourage something like that with Saturn in your third and Pluto in your first for a while as well. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius. So I do hope that this transit treats you super well, brings you a lot of clarity about that ongoing Pluto in your first transit going on. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, we have the Saturn-Pluto sextile going from your second house to your 12th house. So for you, this is fundamentally about value, what you deeply value about yourself internally, how you relate to the notion of value or notions of scarcity, abundance, etc. So you may find that you're kind of more motivated to get right with yourself when it comes to your relationship with your finances, to have that more deeply rooted in a sense of internal security, stability, resilience, understanding that, ultimately come what may, I will be fine. And there's a lot that I bring to the table. There's a lot of value that is of me. And that's what I should be focused on maintaining rather than maybe worrying about or having some self-doubt or fear about whether or not you're going to be okay, right? Whether or not you're going to be secure or stable. So this is going to be speaking of that sense of security, stability, resilience, value internally, kind of more than anything, though it will have that financial angle to it as well, with the second house being your personal resources, finances, income, account balances, and so forth tend to show up here, but it is much more broad than that. And there's a major like esoteric kind of internal value aspect to it. What are your skills? What is valuable to you? What do you prioritize, basically? And then the 12th house is a lot to do with what's going on for you internally and kind of behind the scenes, even a bit outside of your own view of yourself. So our own subconscious tends to show up here, our own patterns and like conditioning and behaviors that we tend to overlook tend to show up in the 12th house. So Pluto is going to be bringing that energy into the equation here as well. So where are there any sort of self-sabotaging behaviors, the self-doubt? Where do any sort of insecurities that you may have come from? You may actually be able, wonderfully with this, to identify some underlying, deep psychological reasoning or something that happened to you when you were young, all of these things that has created a sense of financial like insecurity for you, where even if you are fine financially, you worry about that kind of security. So you may be able to really get at the root of that, get at the crux of that, and be able to start addressing that, which I'm sure would be really wonderful, but it should also be really lasting. So for instance, if this is something that you know what it is, but it's difficult to actually address it and then have it go away, this does bring in the notion of this being a real fix, a fundamental solution that you're coming to along those lines. This can also speak to prioritizing and reinforcing the value of being able to create a comfortable space in which you are able to kind of experience life. So whether that be working behind the scenes and producing a huge amount of value in that effort, or just enjoying and allowing for yourself to prioritize alone time or retreat time or a focus on wellness, a focus on spiritual development, allowing for yourself to prioritize that more and to own and acknowledge that you do really value that, regardless of what other people think, regardless of, the mundane world and the tasks that we need to take care of on a day-to-day basis. If you were really valuing that time where you're able to decompress, where you were able to reconnect maybe to your sense of spirit or to, energies outside of yourself, then you should be able to compartmentalize, you should be able to prioritize that. And by doing so, then feel a lot more in control of your own life. So owning your own internal authority. Others ultimately can't tell you what the value of, anything is. That's up to you. It's literally a value judgment, right? So that's up to you, what you care about and what you are going to allow to be rooted in your subconscious. If there's something there that you don't want to be there, allow for yourself to create some space, some time to work on that. Ultimately, it is up to you how you spend your time, your effort, your energy, and all of these things are your personal resources. I know that we live in a world that so exalts just financial resources and encourages us to spend all of our time pursuing that. It likes to pretend that if our account balances were just a little higher, then we would finally feel in control of our lives. But ultimately, this is really speaking to, there's a need to find that in yourself and to allow for yourself to enjoy that internally, to recognize basically your own personal sovereignty. But yeah, I think that that is a lot of what I have for you, Pisces. So it looks like a really interesting alignment to me. I hope it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.